Afternoon. I am so excited to be here today. Over the years, I have had so many fabulous opportunities to meet adult learners and talk to adult learners around the country. Their stories, they bring tears to your eyes and joy to your heart. But I'm here today to introduce a very special person, our keynote speaker. And thank you to Seeds of Literacy in Ohio for introducing us, because Courtney Schoch is an inspiration to all of us. And she is a lovely woman and has become a dear friend. I don't want to sit here and bore you to tears with a long-winded bio on her, so we have a short little video to show before Courtney comes up.
We could use many words to describe Captain Courtney Schoch. Pilot, marathon runner, mom, nonprofit founder, world traveler, tutor. She is everything that courage and determination stand for, and she is a treasure to the adult literacy community. But it has not always been that way. For many years, her self-esteem was at an all-time low. A challenging childhood, followed by a series of bad and dangerous decisions, left her trapped in a cycle that she tried desperately to escape. For a long time, the only words Courtney felt described her were abuse victim, ex-wife, exotic dancer, and high school dropout. She recognized that if she kept doing the same things, she was going to keep facing the same disappointing results. As an adult, Courtney prioritized her education and faced her fears head-on. She took charge of her own story, and she's now running her life her way. Courtney not only broke free from what could have been a very dark path, but she is now advocating for learners around the world, and she has become an incredible inspiration to all.
Do not let your past define your future.
Thank you so much. It is my honor to introduce Captain Courtney Schoch.
Thank you. Awesome. Hello, everyone. I just want to tell you thank you for the opportunity to give me this wonderful platform to share my story with you. And now that everyone's eaten and everyone can relax, I would like to take you on my journey. So let's begin. It's a hot, humid night in Atlanta, Georgia. A 1969 pumpkin orange Dodge Charger accelerates onto Interstate 75. 6-year-old girl sits in the back, coloring in her Wonder Woman coloring book. The windows are down, and John Fogerty's A Fortunate Son is playing on the radio. Suddenly, gunshots and screeching tires break up the night. The girl glances up just in time to see a wood-paneled station wagon spinning out of control onto the side of the highway in the grass, and her father placing his handgun on top of the dashboard. And what had happened? This girl's father had shot out a man's tires simply because he had cut him off. The girl shrugs, and her gaze returns back to her box of crayons as she searches for the perfect shade of red to color Wonder Woman's knee-high boots. And this is one of my earliest childhood memories. And there are more. The time that my father broke a girl's ankle on the neighborhood playground just because she was bullying me. The half-brother that I never got an opportunity to know because he was incarcerated for drug crimes when I was 8 years old, and he's still there now. My father pushing my mother down the stairs, breaking her legs. The day 2 social workers and 2 police officers came to my home to check my body for bruises, and there were several. And as they walked out the front door, they said to my mother that more parents should discipline their children like they did because it would make their job so much easier. And the numerous times I would hide in the closet with my Walkman volume turned up loud to drown out the sound of the screams and the blows. I was walking home from one day and an ex-boyfriend shot me in the hip with a BB gun, and I was too humiliated to stop and ask for help. So I limped all the way home, hiding the blood pouring down my leg. And the time that my best friend's brother held me hostage in his room for hours with a real gun. And I was 9 years old. We moved at least half a dozen times in just as many years because my parents both worked as private investigators. And my father had explained to me that the reason we moved so much was to keep me safe. And the irony of that is that most of the danger and the harm came directly from my family, regardless where we lived. And at 17 years old, I'd had enough. I had skipped so much school, trying to referee my parents fighting. I just couldn't do it anymore. And with nothing to lose, I dropped out of high school. I closed my eyes, I put my finger on the map, and when I opened my eyes, my finger was in the middle of Lake Erie. I had a decision to make: Canada or Ohio. So I bought a ticket on a Greyhound bus and began my new life in Cleveland, Ohio, renting an apartment over an Italian restaurant when I arrived. And it didn't take me long to figure out that the roommate I'd picked, another young lady, she was a drug addict and a prostitute. My first job was cleaning horse stalls in Ohio. I shoveled poop from 3 a.m. until 7 a.m., 7 days a week for $2.75 an hour. And I loved this job. It gave my brain time to be silent. It kept my body strong, and I felt safe. But I knew that it was not paying the bills, and it was a dead end. So I went to enroll in a community college, and I was told I needed a high school diploma or a GED. I obviously didn't have a high school diploma because I dropped out, and I had absolutely no idea what a GED was because in my family, education was not a priority. Survival was. So I had to ask around, I had to gather information, and finally when I had enough information and figured out what a GED was, I committed to night classes at Max Hayes High School. In 1992, I had achieved the required scores. GED in hand, I went back to the community college, and I had enrolled in an emergency medical technician course. And within a week of starting that course, I became romantically involved with my instructor. When I earned my EMT certification, I thought the future was bright. I was going to join the military. It seemed that it offered the most possibility. And the day that I went to enlist, I found out that I was pregnant by the same EMT instructor. The same instructor that had a wife and 2 young children that I didn't know about. And I was devastated. The drama was par for the course. He left his wife, I moved in, and at 19 years old, I became a stepmother to 2 toddlers and gave birth to my son. And the relationship was violent. Often, when my husband would leave for work, he would lock my son and I in the basement. And he would take fuses from the fuse box and the key to the spare car, leaving us with no electricity and no transportation. And let me tell you, it gets cold in Cleveland, Ohio in the wintertime with no electricity. He also coerced me into becoming a stripper. He told me I needed to pay my way in the relationship. In the meantime, he was spending all of his money on other women, just like my father had done. And when my son was 2 years old, I summoned enough courage to leave. There was no way I was going to let my son grow up this way. The custody battle and the divorce left me bankrupt and emotionally and financially devastated. After I left, and I did win custody of my son, by the way, but I continued to dance because I needed to pay the bills and it was good money. One day I showed up to work at the club, went to the dressing room, and there was a gun pointed at me. The strip club owner had heard that I had been moonlighting at a competitor's club, and he was threatening to blow off both of my kneecaps. A few weeks later, I was in Miami for a long weekend with another dancer, and I woke up at the hotel, and I found a gun pointed in my face by the dancer's drug dealer boyfriend. This is the second time in a month my life had been threatened, and I knew something had to change. I was being a terrible mother. I was making awful decisions. I was drinking heavily. I was clearly hanging out with the wrong crowd, and I was going downhill fast. So I scraped together as much money as I could when I was in Miami, which was not a lot because the drug dealer boyfriend had stolen my wallet, but just enough for a bus ticket back to Ohio. And when I boarded the bus for the 30-plus hour journey home, I remember stealing food out of other passengers' bags when we stopped at rest stops and when they were sleeping because I didn't have enough money to eat. When I got back to Ohio, in 1997, I quit dancing and I started working at Hooters. It was my idea of climbing the ladder. Adding more layers of clothes was like another rung in the ladder. I still wasn't making the best decisions. I was still drinking, I was being promiscuous, and I had gotten myself involved with another married man. I'm not sure if you guys can see the cycle and the pattern, the destruction here. When that relationship ended very badly, I thought the next logical step was to find a stable father figure for my son. And I found him at a bar that I was bartending at after I'd left Hooters. He was 12 years older, he had a stable job, and he was not married to someone else. So I married him. And we had a beautiful daughter within the year. And the relationship was okay. It was passionless. It was kind of stale, but it was stable, and it was not violent. And I had cleaned myself up. I'd even taken some courses online, some business courses, but I just felt like there was more to life. I just felt like there was something more that I could be giving or that I could be doing. And one day, as fate would have it, I was flipping through the entertainment book. Do you guys remember that thick entertainment book with all the coupons in it that little kids would sell you for $20 at the store? And I found a coupon for a 30-minute introductory flight lesson in a small airplane for $50. And I thought, oh, that sounds different. Like, I could go and just try and do that. But there was one problem. I had a terrible fear of flying. I was petrified. Yeah. And there was a small voice in the back of my head that said, give it a try. And that day I chose to listen to the voice. And a week later, I took the introductory flight lesson, and I was hooked. I loved it. I rushed home to tell my husband this, to explain to him this exciting experience and how I had had this glimpse into the future of like a brighter future, not just for myself, but for us as a family, the type of future that I thought only other people could live. Not a high school dropout, not a stripper, not a mother to 2 different kids, not me, but I had glimpsed it. And he was not supportive. The relationship deteriorated, and it turned violent. And I could have continued to ask myself the same questions I'd asked myself my entire life. Why me? Why is this happening to me? How could I be so stupid? How did I make poor decisions? But instead, I chose to ask more empowering ones. Instead, I asked myself, where do I want to go? Why do I want to go there? And how am I going to get there? Where did I want to go? I wanted to be a pilot. That's what I wanted to do. And why did I want to be a pilot? Because I was so tired of traveling on the road someday that leads to the town of nowhere. I was tired of just surviving and not designing my life. And how many of you know someone who's just getting by, who's just going through the motions, who's just going with the flow? And I was tired of that. Now, how was I going to do it? I didn't have that part figured out, but I was ready to start designing my life and not just simply surviving. So that's what I started to do, design. I picked up extra bartending shifts. I worked till 2:30 in the morning. I came home, I slept for a few hours, took the children to school, took a flight lesson after I dropped them off, came back home, slept for an hour or two, went to pick them back up, came home, cooked dinner, cleaned the house, went back to bartend. I did this about 5 days a week, and I also picked up a part-time job at the airport. I would bring flashcards to work when I was bartending, and I would study, and the patrons would laugh at me behind my back, but most often to my face, and they were nasty about it, and it hurt, and it was tough, but I knew that I had to continue. I knew that I had to keep moving forward, keep going, because it was going to be worth it. 2 things happened that expedited my transformation. I met Senator astronaut John Glenn at the local airport. He was waiting for his aircraft to be refueled, and I was preparing for a flight lesson. We spoke for over an hour. He told me to soar, to not let others dictate my future, and to live with passion and enthusiasm. And next, my father died. And I know he wasn't the best role model, but it was a reminder that life is short, that we have to raise our standards, and we get what we tolerate. Those 2 events propelled me to complete flight school, earn my bachelor's degree, divorce my husband, earn my master's degree, earn my flight instructor certificate so I could teach others how to fly, and to forgive others, and most importantly, to forgive myself. A year after my divorce, in 2008, I was flying corporate jets, and we suffered a fatal plane crash, killed all the passengers and the pilots. And I found myself as an unemployed mother of 2 young children, and I was on welfare. The economy was in a deep recession, and the outlook was grim. But I knew I had to keep hanging in there. I had to keep holding on. I had to stay in the arena and fight, because something was going to turn around. And it did. I was hired with an airline several months later. And from the outside looking in, it looked like I made it. I mean, I was a pilot for an airline, and I was flying next to amazing men and a handful of women in this primarily male-dominated industry. All of them had jaw-dropping resumes. I felt like a fraud. I felt like an imposter. Who was I to be flying with these guys and girls? 3 years later, I upgraded to captain. It's 2011. I was one of 450 female airline captains in the world. I was responsible for a multi-million-dollar aircraft. I was responsible for the safe transportation of over 30,000 people. I was a leader, and I just felt like I didn't fit in, even though I'd been held to the same standards, the testing. I had earned my spot in that flight deck. I couldn't shake my past. And I fell back into old habits, an old pattern. I let fear take control, and I did the only thing I knew how to do is I hid my past, praying for years that nobody would find out that I was a dropout, that I was a stripper, that I'd had all these things happen to me. I lived in fear for years. And one day, I was in the park, and a skin cancer diagnosis broke up this fear. It started to bust down the walls, and it introduced me to my love of running. You see, I was in the park next to the woods, and I received a phone call from my doctor delivering the news. I was devastated, and I didn't know what else to do, so I just started running. And I couldn't run far, but when I stopped, I felt amazing. I felt like alive and grateful, and my worries seemed small. And I knew that I had to run again. I just knew it. And when I first started running, I could only run a quarter of a mile, maybe a little bit more if it was downhill. But you got to start somewhere, right? And within a few years, I ran my first marathon, 26.2 miles. And during that marathon, I laughed, I cried, I stumbled, I picked myself back up again, I fell, I wiped out, pulled myself back up, went fast, went slow, and it really occurred to me what a metaphor running is for life. We just keep on going. We keep going forward. I'd always been told that I could never run because I was curvy. I didn't have a runner's body. I was too old. And I listened to that. I would have never experienced this joy that I got from running. And isn't it interesting how so many of our self-imposed limitations truly are just made-up stories that we tell ourselves? In 2014, when I was 40 years old, I moved to Nicaragua and earned my teaching English as a foreign language certification. And I was still flying. I was going back and forth. I learned Spanish. I taught English. I found love. And I tutored at a community school. In 2015, I opened up my own nonprofit. I provided educational scholarships for adult learners and helped assist with job placement. I thought I was going to live in Nicaragua forever. I mean, it was great. It was very fulfilling. I loved it. The universe had another plan. And just when you think you have it all sorted out, life throws a curveball. Political unrest broke out in April 2018 and turned violent. I had no choice but to flee and return back to Ohio full-time. I left behind my scholarship program, my students, my friends, my home, the man I loved, and so much more. But sometimes what we think is a disaster, is a catastrophe, truly is a gift. Because a few months later, I was walking through the Cleveland Hopkins airport and I ran into Margot. She's a tutor at Seeds of Literacy in Cleveland, and she was telling me amazing stories about her GED students and how they were fantastic, but many lacked self-confidence and direction. And I thought, oh yeah, I was one of those students. Then I paused, and I was honest with myself. And I thought, I am still one of those students. And at that moment, I understood what I had to do. All the pieces fit together. It was that aha moment. I knew that it was time that I stopped living in fear. And it was time to own my story and stop letting my story own me. I realized that everyone has a story, and everyone's story is important. And everyone has unlimited potential as long as they do not let fear sit in the driver's seat. And what's important about that is that I needed to get out and I needed to become more public and share it. In 2018, I partnered with Seeds of Literacy. I resurrected my nonprofit, and I committed to running a marathon on all 7 continents. To date, I've run marathons on 4. Antarctica, Australia, and Europe remain. And I stand here before you sharing, or owning my story as a reminder that the past does not define the future. It's not about what we get in life, it's about who we become. And to never, ever settle for less than what we can be. And I encourage all of you, every one of you, to inspire others, and that includes yourself, to ask better questions, to not let fear sit in the driver's seat, and to turn the impossible into possible. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. Before I leave the stage, I do just want to say that first, Kara and Carmen from Seeds of Literacy, they gave me one of my first opportunities to come public, so to speak, with my story in Cleveland, and I'm grateful for that. And then to Michelle and Kevin, thank you for reaching out to me and having me share this, because coming up here, I had to face my fear, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Thank you, guys.